Welcome to Crash Course, a podcast about business, political, and social disruption, and what we can learn from it. I'm Tim O'Brien. Today's Crash Course, Kenya versus climate change. Kenya, in East Africa, is home to some of the planet's most glorious and most threatened wildlife. Like everything else on Earth, the animals that once thrived in this Eden are suffering through the cataclysm of climate change. Long droughts, interspersed with violent and irregular flooding, have altered migration patterns and essential sustenance. Climate isn't the only threat. Poachers, armed with rifles, machetes, and a market abroad that will pay handsome sums for, say, a rhino's horn or an elephant's tusks, are also a menace. Others, primarily outsiders from Europe, began encroaching here more than 130 years ago. That led to decades of ruthless expropriation and conflicts with local tribespeople, the ravages of big game hunting, and the disruption of tribes' more symbiotic relationship with wildlife. Local farmers and semi-nomadic herders, who have lived off these lands for eons, are struggling to preserve their livelihoods. East Africa's droughts, the worst in at least 40 years, have already brought waves of famine. I'm an outsider too, here to explore all of this by visiting two of Kenya's jewels, the Lewa and Mara Naboisho Conservancies. Lewa, located on 93,000 acres, about 172 miles northeast of Nairobi, has been a pioneer in the conservancy movement and has helped stabilize the decimation of black rhinos. Mara Naboisho, 153 miles west of Nairobi, offers a home for big cats, Cape buffaloes, elephants, giraffes, and wildebeests. And the clock is ticking as increasingly formidable environmental challenges bear down. Spiking temperatures mean that much of what has made Kenya, Kenya, may eventually disappear. I often refer to Crash Course guests as guides, but I'm starting off this episode in the company of the real thing, Tom Njogu, the head guide at the Lewa Safari Camp.
So basically we are going to walk along this stream. And there is we might follow the trails here, the vehicle trails, but eventually we'll get into an animal trail. And we'll go and stop, continue walking, stop, look at things if we can see any animals. There's a very good place for antelopes like kudu or impalas. And it's also a place that you could find the buffaloes. That's why we have this armed ranger with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's good to have an armed ranger when you're walking.
Oh, yeah. It's always good because otherwise there will be dangerous animal. Remember, animal like Cape buffalo, like elephants, they are out here. And so without an armed ranger, you'd be in a very, very tricky situation that we don't want to get to now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Then let me start.
Yeah.
Habari, Tom.
Nzuri sana.
So I said Habari, actually. That's Swahili, and you're Kikuyu.
Yes.
So what should I actually say to say hello to you?
In Kikuyu?
Yes.
Wemwega.
Wemwela.
Yeah, Wemwega.
Wemwela.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I'm more than...
Tell our listeners, where are we? What are we looking at right now? What are we seeing?
This is one of the most beautiful valleys in the Conservancy. It's actually called Hankins Valley, after one of the safari goers. And the fact that there is a stream down here that cuts down, there is a lot of bushes, there's these palm trees, and it makes it such a good habitat, especially in a dry season like now. So we might get to see animals down here. And it's a nice place. You can even just sit here. Especially like sometimes when I want to do my own thing, like just meditation, I come down here and sit alone.
So Tom and I have spent about 2 days together already, but we've been in a vehicle the entire time, and we've seen amazing things. We've seen elephant up close, we've seen lion up close, giraffe, zebra, gazelle, oryx, many things, but we've been in a vehicle the whole time. So today we're walking together, and we're protected by our guide and by these two knowledgeable men who are taking me for a walk in a very beautiful place.
Yeah, karibu. Karibu means welcome.
Karibu sana.
Yeah. Okay.
And now we're walking.
Yes. And, hang on a minute. See what is in front of us?
Oh, the track.
Yeah, that is a footprint, a very fresh footprint of a white rhino. Just looking at its size, that tells you it's a white rhino. And this could be 30 minutes to 1 hour ago. Yeah, and it tells you that came down here to drink water and then went up this way. So if we look around carefully, we might get to see a rhino somewhere under the bush, just resting, hiding from the sun now.
Lewa is, of course, known for black rhino.
Yes.
It's one of the last habitats for a large concentration of black rhino, but the white rhino are much larger.
Yeah, they're much more bigger than the black rhino. Yeah, but remember we have both species here, the black rhino and the white rhino. And they're very, very different in terms of the behavior, the habitat and all that. But of course, they all go down to the stream to drink water. So you might get to see footprints of black or the white rhinos along this coast.
And wherever there's water, you're going to find animals.
Yes, oh yes, because water is life for every other animal. Yeah.
So Tom, how did you decide to become a guide?
Well, this has been a long journey for me. And I think it comes from my very, very young age. My village where I was brought up is right on the slopes of Mount Kenya, which means there's a habitat for a lot of wildlife. And coincidentally, or luckily for me, where my dad has a piece of farm was right on the migration corridor for elephants. So we would see elephants twice a year on their way up to the mountains and then on their way back. Like they went up in June, they came back in July. And I remember I spent a lot of time out there looking after my dad's cows and goats. And of course, I would see wildlife from, I don't mean just elephants, but giraffes, ostrich and elands and everything. And I developed that big interest to get to know them from that tender age.
I've said to you a couple times on this trip, you seem like a teacher to me. Is that part of the reason, too, that you like being a guide?
Yeah, I like sharing my experiences and my knowledge that I've gathered along the way. It might not be in a classroom, like probably what my dad wanted me to do, but I'm still a teacher. Yeah.
So how long have you been a guide, Tom?
I've been guiding for the last 17 years.
You've spent so long in Lewa. How has it changed here since you first came? What are some of the biggest changes you've seen?
One of the biggest changes that I've seen is habitat. It's changed so much in the time that I've been here. And when I came here, some of the trails that we've been using when doing game drive, they used to be thick acacia woodland, but they've been opened up with time. The impact of the elephants and the impact of the climate change. You see, elephants are the big players. They are the architects of the habitat out here. When we have more and reliable rainfalls, some of the trees broken down by the elephants will come back. But now, in the recent past, we have had prolonged dry seasons. We have had seasons where we miss a whole rainy season. And so most of these trees broken down by the elephants, they don't come back. And so what used to be thick acacia woodland is opening up to be open savanna grasslands, which is unfortunate because probably it's good to some extent for the grazers, like it's the buffaloes and zebras that they solely depend on grass. But remember, there are also other animals that are browsers, like the black rhino, which is our flagship in this project. Is our flagship animal, the black rhino. So there is a big, big change in terms of habitat, and eventually it will affect the number of animals or the number of species that can survive in an area like this.
I've remarked a few times to you as we've been on safari together the last 2 days that some of the landscape almost looks like there's been a wildfire through here. Mm-hmm. The trees are dark black, they don't have leaves. Yeah. They're sticking up almost like skeletons out of the ground. Mm-hmm. And as you told me, the elephants have traditionally torn some of the acacias up to make their own habitat. Yeah. But when the rainy season comes, it allows the acacias to grow again. Yeah. But now because of drought, they're not regrowing.
They're not regrowing. And it's a sad situation because I've seen some areas that used to be favorite spots for giraffe. Remember, a giraffe is another big browser. Some of the areas that used to be favorite for giraffes, they're no more because they have been cleared by the elephants. What people don't realize is long time back when there was less human population and probably more reliable rainy season or predictable weather, there used to be a balance for everybody. But with the explosion of human population, we have taken more land for settlement, we have taken more land for farming, like those wheat farms you saw on your way in. The areas that have been left aside for the wildlife is getting smaller and smaller. And so the elephant is not like a very, very negatively impacting animal on the environment. They're doing what they have done for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's only that we have taken
thousands of years.
Actually, yeah. So it's just that we have taken more land from them, and then we have pushed them into smaller protected areas. That's why the impact looks much more negative.
We're trying to put these big, beautiful animals basically into bottles.
Yeah, which is a sad situation. And actually, that's one of the key projects of the Lewa Wildlife Conservancy. It's not just protecting the animals that are here in Lewa, but also trying to keep the elephant and other animals' migration corridors open, such that these animals can access the areas that they have been before, of what they used to roam around and to access.
So they're not trapped by a conservancy. They can move from conservancy to conservancy?
Oh yeah, like in Lewa we have the migration corridors. One of them is up into the north, where there is an open gap on the perimeter fence, and about 30 meters wide gap, and there is a raised wall of rocks about 1.5 meters from the ground. So all animals from cats like lions and ostrich and giraffe can climb over, including elephants. But the rhinos with their short legs, they cannot go over. So we have rhinos here full time because of their security, because it will be probably days before they are taken if they are out there. But everything else goes in and out depending on the season or the time of the year.
Do you feel like the pace of change is speeding up?
It is speeding up. I mean, we're seeing more changes. There is a place, and remind me when we drive around, probably tomorrow, there's a place that I'll show you, that our research team has been taking pictures once every year for the last probably 25 years. And if you look at those pictures, they look so different. Yeah. Of late, it's looking much more different than it used to be 10 years ago. I mean, showing you the change of vegetation, how the ground is opening up.
So Tom, let's talk about some of the basics. What is a conservancy?
A conservancy, and I will give an example with Lewa because this is where we are. This is a project and it's privately owned and ran property. And basically what has happened is the people who owned this ranch devoted or gave out their land into conservation. So it is not run by the government. Remember, we have national parks and game reserves. National parks are run by the state. Game reserves are run by the county governments of the respective areas, but this one is run privately. And so it's an entity on its own, basically to take care of the endangered species and try to maintain the habitat and migration corridors for the wildlife.
And what's unique about Lewa among all the conservancies?
Lewa is unique by the fact that it takes care of all the endangered species. And as I mentioned earlier, more importantly, the black rhino that is so endangered. When Lewa was starting, that was back in 1983, black rhino had been pushed to the brink of extinction. There were probably just about 200 animals remaining in Kenya, black rhinos, and that was down from about 20,000 in the 60s. So for projects like Lewa to start taking care of them was very, very, very vital. And today we have seen what conservation like this can do. Lewa, when the black rhinos go up, the population, they do translocate some of them to go and establish some of these other upcoming conservation projects. And also to some national parks. Like I think this year, we're just about to embark on a major translocation. There is another conservation project that is west from here, I would say about 50, 60 kilometers from here. And we are about to translocate part of the rhinos from here because we have 85 of them and we are almost getting beyond our carrying capacity. And so it will be very, very important to go and establish another population there. And that way, I mean, the population spreads and it's a rescue project to rescue the black rhino.
So even amid the challenges of climate change and human habitats, Lewa is a great success story about essentially rescuing a species from the brink of extinction.
Yeah, it is. And Lewa is one of the leading conservation projects. And the reason I say that is we have had people coming all the way from Western Kenya, south in the Mara. We have had people coming from Tanzania to see what we're doing, what Lewa is doing here, and go apply the same concept. So Lewa has been a role model in conservation. And one of the things I would say is what Lewa has done to involve the neighboring community. You know, an effort like this, a project like this, without the support of the neighboring community would be an effort in futility. You need the support of the neighboring communities for this project to succeed.
Because if the neighboring communities resent the conservancy or feel like it's an intrusion, they'll cause problems? Or what's important about having the community participate?
Yeah, I mean, if the community neighboring this conservation project don't reap some benefit, then they'll look at it as a competitor. They look at it as a very good place for keeping their livestock. But then when there is employment, there is bursaries for schools that come from the revenue generated from this place, There is some dispensaries that get funding from the revenue generated from the conservation project. Then people start looking towards conservation as something that they can work with, rather than looking at the animals as a competitor.
Because it's actually part of both a biological ecosystem,
Yes.
but also an economic ecosystem as well.
Economic ecosystem, yeah, because life is changing every day. There is a lot of joblessness out here. And so one of the things is to offer jobs to the young generation that is coming up to have a way of earning a living. And that's one key subject that Lewa has focused on and has worked very well.
So, Tom, we've talked about the environmental challenge, hotter summers, drought, migration patterns disrupted, water disappearing. Another big challenge for all of the wildlife in the community here are poachers, right?
Yes. Poachers is a big threat to wildlife. And we have had our share of that here too. Even though we have one of the best security system for wildlife here, we have had that challenge because poaching is like just the drug cartels. What we get here is good, the people who do the dirty work, who come and kill the actual rhino. But remember...
And for a moment, let's talk about why rhino are valuable. It's not for their whole body.
No.
It's not even for their head.
No.
Some of the trophies in the 19th century that hunters used to put on the walls of their homes. Yeah. Now they're just valued for their horns, and their horns are cut off of their heads and they're shipped abroad, largely to Asia, to either be the handles of daggers or even aphrodisiacs in drinks.
Which is sad. Those are the two big markets. And mostly with the handle for daggers is more to the Arab world, like the Yemen and such. But for the aphrodisiac and all those other medicinal concoctions is from the Far East, stock of Vietnam and China and all that.
And the poachers get into the conservancies at night? They get around the fencing or into any of the reserves? Do they come in by vehicle? Do they come in helicopters, or is it largely on foot?
It's largely by vehicles now. We have not had any case that involved any helicopters, but it's about the vehicles. And what happens is they get dropped just outside the fence. And then they wait for the night and probably mostly go underneath the fence and go in. And then they'll go roaming around, taking chances where they can get the rhinos. I remember some years back where we lost quite a number of rhinos, and eventually they realized that there was some inside game, probably a ranger having been compromised with big money. So these poachers would get in and they knew exactly where the rhinos are. But Lewa has invested so much in security, and I think that was cracked down. And I must say, we are one of the most successful projects in protecting rhinos, because we lost just about 2 rhinos in 11 years, and that is quite an achievement in this region.
Is there any tension between local residents whose tribes or families have lived here for eons and conservationists who want to protect animals, sometimes at the expense of grazing lands or farming lands that traditional tribes have used to live off the land? Is there any kind of tension between the conservationists and the locals, or no?
Oh yeah, that one has been there. And probably the first thing to mention is the question of land in Kenya is very, very sensitive. And it has been made worse by politicians, I must say. Politics is a whole different game. And there have been people inciting other people's against conservation. And most of the time what happens is probably those big shots, they didn't benefit as much as they thought with the conservation project. And they look at that piece of land, or that land is something that they can put into other better use for themselves, rather than how it is being used now, that it benefits big numbers of people, like communities. So there have been those skirmishes, and I think the bottom line is making the conservation benefit the people that are around there. Because one of the things, and this is a mistake that have been done by many people, and it's sad to say that some people has implied that conservation has come with the Europeans, and the natives are regarded as poachers and hunters, which is very wrong. Because one thing people needed to understand is when people out here went hunting, they would take one impala, and that is for food. That would take a whole family for a whole week. But and
they'd use every part of the impala. They'd use the hide, the bones, the meat.
Every bit of it. And you just kill one. And you go back home, you're set for one whole week. But then when people started doing it like sport hunting, somebody comes with a rifle, and one day he can kill 5 rhinos. It changed the whole game. And so the point I'm trying to bring is the locals are very good conservationists. They were the custodians of the same wildlife. As long as they reap a benefit from that conservation project, everything will work very well.
So they can live in harmony if conservationists respect the needs of local tribes and local residents.
Exactly, and we have seen it work, not just Lewa, but the other conservation projects out there that have bought the idea from this project, and it works, and people live in harmony and in peace. And one thing that happened, I must say this, which was one very good example. Some years back, I can't remember how many years ago, one of the guys that used to connect with the poachers and sell information from the villages was apprehended by the villagers. And they said, hey, look, that conservation project, those rhinos are providing bursaries for our kids, is providing medicine in our dispensary. We can't keep you here to kill those rhinos when that is the source of our water, of our medicine and everything. So he was apprehended and taken to the authorities, and he ended up behind bars. So that was a very strong message, telling you that as long as they know the benefit, the people here, the communities are very okay with the conservation project. And I think that's the only way to go. It's the way forward.
Tom, I'm going to take a slight break here right now so we can hear from one of our sponsors back in the United States, okay. And then we'll continue our walk and we'll pick it up in a minute. So I'm back with Tom, my guide here in Lewa. And we're now walking uphill after having walked across a plain and a little bit downhill. Tom, where are we headed now?
We covered quite some distance, and as you can see further ahead of that, this is much thicker bushes in the valley, and this is kind of a perfect spot for a buffalo. Uh-huh. And one of the animals you need to avoid when you're walking in Africa is African Cape buffalo. So we kind of changing our course a little bit to go uphill where we can see a little bit higher and further ahead, and it's much more clearer from there.
So we can see the buffalo but not have to compete with the buffalo.
Oh yeah, we don't want to compete with the buffalo. Okay. Not when we are walking.
Okay, I'll follow you up.
Okay.
Definitely bushwhacking here.
Yep. See from this point, because we are much more higher ground. If a buffalo was down there, we would get to see it much faster. And of course, it's difficult for them to climb up here. So we'll be in a much safer position.
We talked a little bit more about climate change and how it's changed the landscape here since you first came here. Yeah. What else do you see around you in terms of the land? How climate change has really transformed the land here?
The signs are all over, and it's very, very evident. I actually get surprised when some people don't believe on climate change. For example, my kids, and I'll go back all the way back when I was a young boy. As I told you, I was brought up right on the slopes of Mount Kenya, right by the equator. And so we used to see snow, big snow at the top of Mount Kenya, the peaks of Mount Kenya. Huge, huge snow. I mean, every season. Right now, there's so little that you can see up there. It's so little.
And the snow is more than merely a beautiful cap on the mountaintop.
Yeah.
The valleys below, the land below depends on runoff from the top of the mountain.
Exactly, and that's what I was coming back to. When I was young, we used to spend time out grazing cows and sheep for the better part of the day. We would go to the river to swim, like as early as 10, when we take the cows down to go drink water. I went there just the other day. I mean, when I go back to the village, I just want to go back in time. And I went to the same river that we used to swim. The water can barely get beyond your ankle. And the boys nowadays, they have nowhere to swim. Actually, most of them don't know how to swim now. There is less and less water because the snow has melted. One of the big impacts I've seen in the village, live around here in a conservation project like this with all the wildlife. Back in our home, we have piped water, and that's what my parents have been using for irrigation. And they could do snow peas and French beans and potatoes and all that using the water. Right now, that source of water is not supplying enough water to the farms, and now what has come up is water rationing. So this village gets water on Monday, the next one gets it on Tuesday, and so it's get back to your village like 3-4 days later, which is not enough for farming. And so a good example is my dad now. He used to be a very good farmer. Not anymore, because there is not enough. I mean, the pieces of land now he can farm is just basically for him and my mom. That's it. So he has no capacity to farm for that surplus product that he can sell. And We used to have elephants much longer here, like they would come right after the rains because there would be more and more shrubs and flowers blooming, which is basically food for the elephants. Right now they will come, but they spend just a little bit of time. And that food is finished because there is not enough. And then what happens, they have to go up into Mount Kenya because it's much more cooler, there's much more vegetation. So the migration is happening more often now than it used to be because the food gets finished, they have to go to Mount Kenya and back. And remember what this means is they have to walk through some of the community lands to Mount Kenya forest. And that is actually what has brought most of the incidences we have had with human-wildlife conflict. Because these elephants are trying to get back to the places they know there is good pasture, there is a spring where they can get water. Some of them have dried up, some of them have been fenced off for farming. And what we have nowadays is animals getting into people's farms, and then some of them end up getting killed. What Lewa has done, one of the main key things in conservation that happened between Lewa and the neighboring communities here, as you look towards the south, towards Mount Kenya, there is a highway that comes from Nairobi. There's a lot of farms, which is a human development that have cut off the migration corridors for wildlife. What Lewa and other conservation-minded people have dug an underpass under the highway, put big culverts. And then on the other side, people has contributed land to build a corridor. And so elephants now, from Lewa or from further north, they can come into Lewa, spend some time, go under the underpass. I mean, there are big trucks driving overhead, and these elephants can now again access Mount Kenya forest. And it means that the population that have been stuck up there and the population that have been stuck down here, they can intermingle again and spread of the gene pool again, which is healthy for the gene pool.
What an image that we've had to save the elephants by building corridors for them beneath human-made highways.
Yeah, and I think it tells you that there's still more that human can do to make life easier and rescue some of these species. We just need to accept that the world has changed. The climate is here with us. We need to allow these animals to access more land to get back to areas that they have been accessing ever since. Hear those birds? There were hornbills up on this acacia tree, the one ahead of us. And that is a duet between a male and a female. So the male is singing for the female and she is responding. Yeah.
Birds are just like humans.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot that happens is here is pretty much the same that happens with our lives. Yes. Yeah. Actually, when you go out there on a game driving, sometimes you just switch off your vehicle and stay and observe animals. You get to see so much that is so common to us.
Earlier, you and I sat for maybe 15 minutes and watched a male ostrich try to court a female ostrich.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah?
It was interesting.
Yeah, and like you saw the case today, that male was just dancing and the female was probably not interested and she was just walking away. And eventually when the male realized, I mean, he turned off and, I mean, went running away, probably embarrassed.
Yes, totally embarrassed. So, Tom, do you have any thoughts about solutions for climate change in this world that you live in here? Are there good steps either local residents or local businesses or the government or conservationists could take that they're not taking right now that would help with the environment and with climate change?
There's been a lot of discussion on that part, and I think the thing is we need to educate people more and make them realize that the little step you do contributes to the whole thing eventually. Because like I know here in Lewa there is 2 vehicles now that are electric vehicles, and that's one of the trial projects, see whether we can have electric vehicles do game drive. It's been quite interesting to watch them because I think animals like elephants have been used to vehicles with sound, and so when these vehicles approach slowly and silent, elephants are getting spooked. But we hope with time they will get used to that. Generally, what we need to focus on is to get more of the green energy. I think you saw by the camp where we are, most of that water that people are using is solar heated. Back at the staff quarters, we use solar panels. We have a backup generator, but probably we need to encourage people to use more green energy. There are some steps that have been taken by the country, I must say. Like I think 2 years ago, Kenya opened up the largest wind power project in Africa. is north of here. But again, other than that, what I think most is even to protect the environment that we have now before it gets too bad. One of the things that I look at myself is when I see there is now Kenya has some oil projects coming up, which I think we should invest more on green energy, like I said. We have 7 days of powerful sunshine, like 4 seasons, which would mean that it would be a big catch if we manage to trap that. And also talk to people of as I said, the habitat that we have. There's so much damage happening on the environment that we already have. And that comes from probably like the farms, which end up into the rivers and eventually end up into oceans. I know there are some projects that people are trying to, first thing, our country banned polythene papers, which I think was a big step.
This is paper production that pollutes the environment.
Because that destroys the environment completely. Because to me, I think it's not just the climate, but also the environment that we have today. Protect what we have now before it gets even destroyed further. And sometimes I look at the paper that is out there and in the oceans and in the rivers. And one of the key issues, I think, is people get strict on the polythene paper. Because to me, I think that was the worst invention that human race has done. Forget about the chemicals, but the polythene is so damaging. And luckily, the government is taking steps. It's not successful yet, but it's taking some steps. I think that people should take care of much more better. Protect what we have before we get into climate change with the carbon pollution and all that.
We always ask anyone who's a guest on our show to tell our audience what they've learned, what a core thing they've learned in their own life, in their own work. You've been a safari guide for a long time. What have you learned along the way?
The world is changing, and it has already changed. The future is in our hands. It's about us to act, and to act now. Otherwise, if we don't, it will be too late. We need to make changes. We need to emphasize those people who know and accept that there is climate change. We need to act more and put more effort and try as much as we can and educate people and tell everybody to act now. Take the step that you can, however small.
Tom Njogu is the head guide at Lewa Safari Camp, and he is an incredible teacher and guide. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. It was good talking to you.
We're going to take another break to hear from a sponsor, and then I want to take you to another and very different conservancy. The Mara Naboisho Conservancy is adjacent to the Masai Mara National Reserve, a 580 square mile haven for one of Earth's great spectacles, the post-rainy season migration of myriad species from Tanzania into Kenya via the Mara River. The entire Mara has suffered through a series of failed rainy seasons, leaving huge numbers of people contending with extreme hunger. Humans and animals increasingly find themselves battling for a shrinking pool of resources. I'm lucky to have Dickson Kereto, a veteran guide with the Encounter Mara Camp and a Maasai tribesman, joining me here to talk about climate's onslaught. Jambo, Dickson.
Jambo, team.
So, Dickson, tell me, how long have you been a guide?
I've been a guide for the last 15 years now.
Entirely in the Mara or elsewhere?
I have only worked in the Mara.
And of course, we're here in the Mara today. Tell me what we are looking out at right now. We're on a beautiful deck outside the Encounter Mara camp. Tell me what we see.
So we are overlooking a salt lick area where it's a very famous place for animals to come and lick the soil for mineral. A lot of times we see elephant, giraffe, zebras, wildebeest all come down here for the salt lick and also to have a drink.
Now, the salt lick also looks like it's exposed because the river that runs past here is dry. Is that the case too?
That's true, because we haven't had enough rain for the last almost 3 years now. We've had some rain in between, and this river has been dry for quite a while now. And that's why the salt lick is quite exposed.
So you and I have been on safari for a couple of days together now. You've been an amazing guide. We've seen so many beautiful things traveling together through this area. And you've a few times referred to the Mara as your office in the greatest of ways, that you have one of the world's best offices because the entire Mara is where you do your work. How has the landscape changed here during your years as a guide? Like, what ways have you witnessed climate change alter what you see around you?
So you are indeed right. I call this my office because I was born here, I grew up here, and I have always worked here. So I've been here my entire life. And over the last 15 years that I've been working as a guide, I have noticed a lot of changes to do with land and also to do with wildlife population and also to do with the way people live here. We've had a lot of negative effect on climate change. Like for the last 15 years, we've had years that we don't get rain at all. And that has affected the way people live and has also affected the way wildlife roam around here. Especially the local people, if you go back to the villages, a lot of people in the villages use domestic animals as a source of livelihood. And because of lack of rain, a lot of time the animals are looking very skinny. So that means they don't give people enough money, they don't give people enough meat, and they don't give people enough milk. And people are really struggling. And a lot of time that has really created hard times for the people in the village. And even for the wild animal, because of lack of rain, most of our rivers have been very dry. And what that means, animals will have to move to other places to try and look for water. And if there is one place within a conservancy like Naboisho Conservancy that has water, you will find a big concentration of animals there. And what that means is that there will be overgrazing in those areas, which has really affected the behavior of wild animals around the Mara.
In fact, fewer animals are migrating now into Kenya from Tanzania, and they stay for shorter periods of time because the resources have been tapped. Not entirely dry, but certainly strained to a breaking point. Isn't that correct?
That's very correct. Climate change, like I said earlier, has changed animal behavior. Like when you go back to the migration that happened between Kenya and Tanzania, there has been a lot of changes in terms of timing. Sometimes they come into the Mara a little bit late, and this is because of the climate change. And sometimes we don't even get the right numbers because it just means that there's no enough grass and enough water for them to migrate into the Masai Mara. And we've actually seen that pattern over the last few years. Sometimes they come late, sometimes they come early, and this is all because of the change in the weather.
You referred to this earlier, but there's almost like a vicious cycle here, isn't there, because of climate change? Herbivores now come into areas where they once didn't graze, and then carnivores, like lions, follow them on to that land. And then the lions sometimes attack farmers' cattle because they're hungry. And then the farmers, to defend their cattle, kill the lions. And it's all because these species and human beings that once lived together no longer can live together in perfect harmony because climate change is forcing them to do things they didn't once do.
That's true. So what actually happened now that we've been having this effect of climate change, it happened that wild animal and domestic animal have been forced to sort of head toward one area where they can all find water and grass. And once you have all the herbivores there, obviously that attracts a good number of cats. And once that happens and there's domestic animals together with the people there, you start having a conflict, wildlife-human conflict. And this is because there's only one resource for all these, wild animals and domestic animals. You find that if you look around and count the Mara Camp, there's very long grass here. So that means animals have not been here for a while. And what happened, because it's the only place they can find some water, because we are near one of the rivers that animals can find water in Naboisho Conservancy, it will attract a lot of herbivores to come down here. And then that means also cats will be attracted to come here. And then at the same time, because within Naboisho Conservancy, the local people are allowed to bring their cows in for water and grass. And what that means, you'll end up having wild animal, cats and domestic animals and the people all in the same area. And that creates, a conflict between them, because then the lions will start eating the local people cows, and then in return the local people will try and defend their cows, and that really end up, creating a lot of conflict between humans and wildlife.
As you mentioned earlier, you grew up here. Tell me what your childhood was like, where you lived, and how that's changed as well. Not really the animals as much, but how it's affected people.
If I try to think of the life back when I was young and the life now, I think has changed a lot, because to begin with, when I was young, the Maasai tribe that I come from used to move from one place to another place in search of grass and water for their animals. But a few years down the line, the land has been subdivided. I'm talking about 20 years ago. And once that happened, it just means that every land here belonged to an individual family. And that movement of people from one place to the other is no longer happening anymore. And that's a little bit difficult for the Maasai people, because that's what they're used to. And because the land now belongs to people and lands are privately owned now, If you have to move from your land to another somebody's land, you have to seek permission, which is something that the Maasai people are not used to because it's new. And that has really affected the way the Maasai people want to have big herds of cows, and also affected the fact that people want to have big families. But because the land is not getting bigger anymore, you need to be careful how big your family is going to be. And that's really affect the way that Maasai people should live compared to what happened in the past. So if I look at, back when I was young and now, a lot has really changed in terms of how people live and how people prefer to live as a tribe.
Farming makes up about a third of Kenya's economy. Tourism, fueled by folks like me, is only about 10%. True. I think agriculture employs about 40% of the country's total population, and in rural areas, I think almost 70%. So farming is still this vitally important trade, not only to the people who practice it, but to the broader country as well. Mm-hmm. And now you've got climate bearing down on farming in the most ruthless of ways. Yeah. Is this something that everyone you speak with in your tribe and elsewhere is aware of and talks about all the time?
That's correct. Although farming here is actually based on domestic animals, which include cows, goats, and sheep. But in other part of the country, you find people growing crops. But that has not been possible here because of the fact that this is an area that has a high number of wild animals, particularly the elephants. And growing crops here means that you're attracting elephants to come and live with you. And that eventually will cause a lot of conflict between you and the elephant.
That's why it's easier to herd cattle than to grow a crop here, right?
That's right. And that's why a lot of people here are farming animals. And like I mentioned earlier, now that the land has been subdivided and is privately owned, people have not been able to have big herds of cows as they should. Because in our culture, if you have a big number of cows, you become famous, you become very well known. And it just means that if you don't have a good number of cows, you can't have a big family, and you can't also be able to look after other people, because Maasai people are people who actually try to look after each other, even though you belong to different families. And the only time you can do that if you have a good number of cows that you can actually share with other people. And that's really affected the way Maasai people want to kind of interact with each other and live together and be social as they should be according to our culture.
So are farmers and herders organizing? Are they trying to jointly come up with a response to both climate change and some of the other forces that are disrupting their lives?
Well, people are trying to do quite a number of things. First of all, it's no longer about quantity, but it's about quality. Now that you only have a limited size of land, people are now trying to improve the quality of the animals and actually reduce the numbers. So you improve the quality and then you take the numbers down so that the number of cows that you have will be actually equivalent to the size of land you have. And that's one of the measures that people are trying to take so that they can try and deal with the climate change. People are also trying to create sources of water. People are digging wells to try and store water. Like when we happen to have, good rain, you have a place to store water in times that, when it doesn't rain, and you can actually have water for your animals and for your family as well.
Dickson, is there a solution to climate change in Kenya? Is this a problem Kenya can solve on its own?
I personally have a strong feeling that whatever thing that is happening or whatever thing that revolves around climate change has nothing to do with us as Kenyans. And if it has to be very little. Unfortunately, what messed up the weather and the climate change is what happened elsewhere. And I think that the only way we can have a solution to this problem is if the whole world unite and listen to each other. And also we all get focused to try and eliminate the kind of things that we're doing as humans that really affected the weather and bring up the issue of global warming and climate change. Otherwise, us as Kenyans, I think there's very little we can do. I mean, there's a part that we can play as a country, but we need people to join us and we need to join other forces to be able to bring this solution to be realized.
Are you optimistic about that? Are you pessimistic? How do you think about it when you think about your country's future, your own future, and how the world's currently responding to climate change?
Well, personally, to be honest with you, I'm afraid. I'm just hoping that one day we'll be able to get a solution. But I think it will take a little bit of time, and it just scares me.
Why do you think it will take time?
The reason why I think it will take time is because it's something that we cannot do as a country. And we really have to convince other nations to agree with us we have to convince other nations to partner with us and work with us to bring about change on this climate change.
Because the world's largest carbon emitters aren't in Kenya. They're in China, they're in India, they're in the US, and they're in Western Europe.
True. Yeah, that's why I'm saying we cannot do much as a country. We need other people to join us, and we need other people to listen to us, and we need other people to work with us so that we can, bring about this change. Otherwise, like I said earlier, unfortunately, some of the things that have led into this climate change are not happening in Kenya. They're not probably even not happening in the continent of Africa, but it's happening outside Africa. And unless and until they realize that that's where the problem is and agree with us to solve the problem, working together as a team, I don't think it's going to happen very soon.
I always like to ask guests on the show what they've learned. You've been a guide for a long time. You're a veteran guide. When you look back to the point in time when you started doing what you do so well now, to who you are now, what's the most important thing you've learned?
First of all, I've learned that working together is what brings about change. Because when I think about myself as a Kenyan and the things that happen around this country and the things that happen around my environment, it just reminds me the fact that I have to be connected with other people, not just necessarily within Kenya, but outside Kenya, so that we can try to change things around for the better future of our children. But, before I work as a guide, I didn't know that, but I came to realize that there's so much that happens outside there that affect the life and affect the environment here. And then number two, I have also been able to learn so much about wildlife and learn so much about climate change. Climate change is not only felt in Kenya and in Africa, but it's also felt in other countries. Before I meet people and start talking to them about climate change, I thought this was only a problem for Africa and a problem for Kenya. But I came to learn that it's not just for Kenya, it's not just for Africa, but it's for the whole world. And that just gave me a little bit of hope, because if it's being felt in the US or in China, then I have a feeling that one day, one time, we will come into a common reasoning and look for a solution.
Dickson Kereto is a veteran guide at the Encounter Mara Camp in Kenya, and he's a wonderful man, and it was great having you join us here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to have had this opportunity to join you, and I'm happy to be part of this interview, and I'm also happy to be part of climate change solution.
Thank you, Dickson.
Thank you, too.
Here at Crash Course, we believe that collisions can be messy, impressive, challenging, surprising, and always instructive. In today's Crash Course, I learned that no country, especially Kenya, but the United States as well, is going to beat back the climate change threat on its own. What did you learn? We'd love to hear from you. You can tweet at the Bloomberg Opinion handle, @opinion, or me, @Tim O'Brien, using the hashtag Bloomberg Crash Course. You can also subscribe to our show wherever you're listening right now and leave us a review. It helps more people find the show. A special thanks to the team at Expert Africa, especially Lindsay Maris, who helped arrange but did not pay for my visit to Kenya. This episode was produced by the indispensable Anna Mazarakis, Moses Andam, and me. Our supervising producer is Magnus Henriksen, and we had editing help from Sage Bauman, Katie Boyce, Jeff Grocott, Mike Nitza, and Christine Vanden Beilart. Blake Maples does our sound engineering, and our original theme song was composed by Luis Guerra. I'm Tim O'Brien. We'll be back next week with another Crash Course.